Tell us about the work you're doing with the troops in Germany in that time. What sort of work were you doing?
Well, they were people who were in the field, so they were going to be infantry people. And what are they doing with having to learn math? Well, they had to learn about the metric system because things were being done in the metric system. It wasn't a very good operation. That didn't work too well because their mindset was on our system.
Inches and
Yes,
miles
yes,
and
yes,
things like
not
that.
meters
Yeah.
and things.
Yeah.
And that presented a lot of problems. But they had to brush up on their math skills no matter what area, whether they're going to be with a mechanic, whether they're going to be in artillery especially.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a program there. And it was just general math. It was nothing spectacular.
Sure.
It was general math, and I really did enjoy that.
Yeah.
They didn't do it all day. They did it a couple times a week, but there were different groups. So I went out maybe 3 or 4 times to different groups.
And now this work that you're doing, was this, was this work being done particularly with Vietnam in mind? Were your instructions to kind of help get these guys ready for Vietnam, or just get them ready in general?
No, my instructions and our instructions were to get them proficient in arithmetic.
Okay.
And the metric system.
Did your first husband, did he deploy to Vietnam?
Yes,
or?
he was there. He was with the medical corps.
He was there as a doctor or as a medic?
No, as an administrator.
As an
a
administrator.
hospital administrator.
What year did he go there?
From 65 to 68. Right around there.
Yeah, in that. So he's there when the war's
and one of
really
the things
gets
he had
big,
to do, he wasn't terribly stable when he went there. And he was less stable when he returned. Now, he is very intelligent, but emotionally lacking. It solved the problem with drinking. So the drinking became worse. And I can even understand why it would, because what he had to do was put dead people in body bags to send them back. Get them ready. So that's gonna. So a lot of drinking took place while he was there. So yeah, he was there, and
now in his work, he's not out on patrol. He's not out in firefights.
No.
But he's dealing with the aftermath.
He's dealing. Yes.
Just thinking about that time, that Vietnam War era. What memories, what thoughts do you have about the impact on the country? You're with troops in the late 50s, early 60s. You continue to work with troops in the late 70s.
Yeah.
You see the military go through this transition. What kind of comes to your mind?
Initially, not too much, because when my first husband, when he went to Vietnam, I did not want to go to Chicago, where I was born and raised. I wanted to be on my own with the children. And again, there were 6 of them then. And so I knew that if I went to Chicago, that I'd be having people say, "Oh, poor thing, poor this, poor that." And being kind of hard-headed, I wanted to be me and run my life myself. So
yeah.
You may or may not believe this. I actually opened a map of the U.S., closed my eyes, made a circle over it with a needle in my hand, and I went boom, and it was California.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it was near a Marine base, Tustin, California.
Yeah, kind of in the general LA area.
Right.
Like
and
that, yeah.
Most of the people that lived there were geographical widows, because their husbands, who were pilots, most of them, were in Vietnam. So we had our own little community. And because we were near a base, not on it, but close by, we all had our own feelings about the war. And we just thought everyone was patriotic like we were. And then when my husband came back and we went across country, I couldn't believe the things that were going on. I
Really?
couldn't believe the ugliness. Yeah.
What, because your husband's in uniform? Or, and is hearing things?
No,
Or
just with the attitude of the people. The
Yeah.
attitude of the people was they were either patriotic to a degree, or they were hateful. And I can honestly say that I'm not a great. I did not think the Vietnam War was the right thing to do. I was against it. Definitely against the war, but I was for the troops.
Yeah.
And therein lies the difference.
And at the time you made that distinction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
I was never for that war.
Really?
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
And
Did you ever have a conversation like that with other wives at the time? Just, what do you, wives talking among themselves? I mean, our husbands are overseas and...
none of them wanted their husbands to be there,
Sure.
and none of them saw anything really good coming out of it. What they saw was people coming back that they didn't know.
Because they've been changed so much by their experience. Yeah.
So
As you look back now on Vietnam, I mean, I don't know how often it comes to your mind, but as you look back on that period now, what are your main thoughts about it?
it's really, my main thoughts are not much different. I mean, Vets feels that it was the right thing to do, and that's, I'm glad that he feels that way because he gave up a lot of his life for that. And he knows how I felt about it, and so I appreciate him and the service he did.
Sure.
And I'm irritated when others don't appreciate him.
What feelings do you remember having about the protesters? I mean, you yourself, you're opposed to the war, but you support the troops. But then you've got the protesters who are clearly opposed to the war. What memories do you remember having about the protests?
I felt that the protests were wrong, that the best way that they could have protested would have been to try to write their Congress people and try to help the people who were left behind. Even if they ran off to Canada or somewhere else,
Yeah.
I can understand them not wanting to go in.
Sure.
Fine, that's fine. But to actually go out and start throwing eggs at people, at troops when they came back, or spitting on them and calling them baby killers.
In addition to the enemy that you have in the country, you also know that there are protests at home. So you feel like you've got an enemy in country, you've got an enemy back home. What you're experiencing in the field doesn't seem to align with what you're hearing from the politicians. On top of that, you've got the leeches and the ants and the snakes and the intense heat and the humidity. And these 19 and 20-year-olds are just getting pressure from every side.
They are.
It's maybe amazing more of them didn't snap.
Yeah.
In that context.
Yeah. Well, especially with, if you can imagine, a 6-year-old kid is pointing a gun at you.
A 6?
And it's at 6 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a gun that can kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you stand there and let him kill you? No.
Yeah.
You shoot him.
Yeah. It's a very tough war.
Yeah. Or a woman holding a baby.
Yeah.
And she's got a grenade in her hand.
What are you going to do?
She hasn't pulled the pin yet. Do you let her pull the pin and kill all of you, or do you shoot her? I wouldn't want to make those decisions.
Yeah, yeah, that's a tough thing.
And what would I do if I were in that position? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'd like to think I would be brave and bold, but I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm guessing it was your work with with soldiers, really before Vietnam really gets going, late 50s, early 60s, where you get to know them as people.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm guessing that's probably what helps you to make this distinction.
Yes.
That these are, mostly 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds who are following orders, therefore they're in Vietnam.
Right.
Leads you to the conclusion that those are people I've worked with, right? And I know that they're not bad people. So you make a distinction between the policy and the people.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
doing their job. Now, Project 100,000 was set up by McNamara, who is Secretary of Defense, I think, well, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of problems during the Second World War getting troops to be able to read manuals and function well. They just weren't able to do that. So McNamara developed a program and used 100,000 troops to see how this would work out. And he tried to get their reading levels up to fifth grade, I believe. And this supposedly was supposed to make them more combat ready. And so at any rate, it started, it did not work. They did their best. They felt it would.
Yeah.
So it was a good, the objective was good.
Yeah.
The reality
Yeah.
just didn't fit in with what the objective was.
Well, let's work this out a little bit. Now, was the primary short-term objective of Project 100,000 to get, I mean, just to put it simply, to get more troops to Vietnam?
Yes,
That was
to
part
get
of
more
it.
troops to Vietnam and have them better prepared
Sure.
theoretically than they were during the earlier wars.
Yeah.
And
And did that involve, in order to make more soldiers eligible to go to Vietnam, having to lower some of the entry standards?
theoretically, it was going to make them eligible to be in the military, yes. And the stated objective was not only would they be better soldiers, but when they returned from duty to civilian life, they would be better prepared
Sure.
for.
So the idea
Civilian
is,
life.
okay, it may be that if they take a test to get into the Army, they would not pass the recent standards, but now they pass this new standard. We'll train them up,
That's right.
and they'll get the benefit of that training,
Yes.
and then they'll also benefit later
Yes.
in life.
But the manuals didn't change. These things didn't change. They were supposed to, in 6 weeks, learn what they should have been learning from ages 6 to 10. You know,
Right.
it doesn't happen. They're adults.
Wow.
So at any rate, that just did not work. And they learned when they went in and did some checking out to see how many troops were killed during the war. There were more of 100,000 people, much more. And also, when they left, of the ones the survivors who left the military and went back into civilian life, the ones who were in the project did poorer getting jobs than those who were not in the program.
Yeah, and I'm tempted to have that, to get into that nature nurture discussion about intelligence, et cetera, but I wonder if this kind of is an example of how if something's built in, it's built in, and there's not a whole lot that can be.
It's true.
Can be done
That's
about
true. There
Yeah.
is a whole lot that you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're going at it from a strictly technical training for reading, rote type stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, you're not training anything else. Now, when they realized, of course, that was not working, they just dropped the whole thing. But the Army still wanted something to help the people come in and maybe stay in, at least for a couple tours anyway.
Right.
And so the Humero out in California at Monterey developed a program. It took them many, many years, and rather than just teaching them how to read, they rewrote the manuals. They had everything in it that was necessary for a cadet, an enlistee to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But it was done in a very simple manner.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was done in stages. And then they had sections of their learning program after they read this little manual, got to read the little manual, and then they had, they would give, say for preparing a meal or for fixing a truck, the things that you had to do first. And they would have maybe 10 different steps to do this.
Sure.
And they were all numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the book. The way you'd have to do it. So then they'd have reading comprehension, and part of reading comprehension then was to take the 10 steps that were out of order, very much out of order, and put them into order. So this caused them to do their thinking a little bit differently.
So it sounds like what, the failure of Project 100,000, then, one of the things that leads to is a recognition that if we're going to help the troops educationally, we just kind of have to change how we go about it. Yeah.
And then the teachers, we had maybe 15 students in each class. So the number of teachers that were on higher would depend on how large the group was that was coming in. They tried to keep the groups the same.
Right. Yeah.
Then they would have to. Well, that didn't happen in Monterey. That happened in Fort Jackson. When they finished with their program, they wanted to try it out somewhere, and they knew that Fort Jackson in South Carolina had a program where they were taking the troops and teaching them how to read, and they asked if they would be interested in being a pilot program.
Oh, I see. Okay.
For the new Hummer literacy.
Yeah.
So they sent us all the materials, and then the teachers, we had about 6 months where we had to put it all together and put it into booklets and set it up and determine where we were going to do this and how we were going to do it and how we were going to approach the students.
Sure.
And so we put the pamphlets, we put the books all together, and there were 6 different books for there was a manual, but the manual is broken down into 6 different books, which we had in the 3 in binders, little binders. Yeah. And so they would start out with book number 1, and they progressed as they were able to.
Right.
So they didn't all work in book 1 or book 2 or book 3. It was a process.
They start in a different place.
Yes, it was a process.
Yeah.
And the first thing was kind of a basic reading, C-spot, run, etc. And some of them didn't recognize letters. It was left to the teachers to determine how they were going to teach them.
I mean, let me just ask you real quick. I mean, what it's a sensitive topic when you're talking about the intelligence of individuals and so on. But if you have a soldier for whom C-spot run is challenging, what kind of work can that soldier actually do? In the service?
Well, that was an extreme example.
Right.
But it was. Well, the one thing, they had difficulty, they never learned what things looked like. They never learned what certain letters looked like. I'd had a little sandbox, and I'd have a picture of the letter.
Yeah.
And I'd take their hand and draw it. And say it.
Yeah.
And then they had to look at it and say S, and then write S and say it.
Wow.
So they're using their vision, their hearing, their touch, sense of touch, using different senses. So, but maybe the next guy at the next table isn't learning that way. So how is he learning? Some of them didn't have more than, maybe 15 minutes of concentration time, and then it was all over.
No, I'm sorry.
The teachers would break into each other's classrooms every now and again.
Okay.
And do something stupid.
Right.
And make them laugh.
Yeah. You mentioned that the Project 100,000 guys, the troops, and it's primarily Army, I think, the soldiers who get into the Army under that program and then go to Vietnam with that program, that their killed in action percentages were much higher.
Yes.
Is that? Let me put the question this way, because I never really thought about this until I read a book about Project 100,000. And the author made the point that to be a good soldier in a combat situation, you've got to be able to think really quickly. You've got to be able to assess situations really quickly. You've got to be able to react really quickly.
True.
Not just physically, but before you have the physical action, you've got the mental action. So you've got to process. And, and he made the point that special forces, the elite special forces, these are highly intelligent individuals who are also in incredible physical shape. Do you think that there's it's a sensitive and difficult topic, but do you think there's a correlation between the high percentage of killed in action among the Project 100,000 guys and just sort of a natural ability to process quickly, to process information and so on?
I would say in most cases, in some cases, yes, but not in all.
Okay.
And maybe because they were called the 100,000, they were called fodder. They would be put in the tanks that were going in there first. They didn't have to have a brain even. They didn't even have to really be awake. They're blown up.
These are okay. So
they were the first ones to go. Yeah. If you're running in a line at someone, they were in the front lines. Come on.
They're not smart enough. Just to put it crassly, they're not smart enough to figure out what's going on, and they're not smart enough to protest or whatever. They're just put in the front.
How can you process something like that? If people are shooting at you and you're running forward, what are you going to do?
Sure. So your sense is that the high percentage of killed in action among the Project 100,000 relative to other troops isn't necessarily due primarily to an inability to understand what's going on, but to kind of what was done with them, how they were used. Because, just another, you didn't use this phrase, but of course a phrase that's used at the time, which is not a sensitive
You were right, which is why they took them out of artillery and infantry.
Yeah.
And not because they couldn't function. There are things in infantry. You're supposed to be protecting the guy next to you, so yes, you have to be able to think on your feet.
Yeah.
But also, if someone's shooting at you,
Yeah. So a term used at the time was McNamara's morons.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it sounds like a little part of what you're saying anyway is that, here comes, into our group, here comes one of McNamara's morons, one of the Project 100,000 guys. So, so that's the label that's on this person, so that person is going to walk point for us tomorrow. This person's going to be in the front tomorrow.
That's right.
And I don't know these things. I'm just guessing. You just figure, well, let's put the guy with, apparently with a relatively low IQ, let's put him up front to catch the mine, and then the rest of us will know what's going on. Is that kind of?
That's really horrible, isn't it? And it's really horrible, but it's the reality.
So your sense is that did happen. That's not just rumors, but that's.
Yeah, I don't like to think that.
Right.
But
yeah.
Yes.
What's your as a person long involved in education, especially involved in education among military personnel? Do you think that? Do you agree with that assessment that that your best fighters are going to be guys, maybe not intellectuals, but they have. You have to have a sufficient degree of intelligence to process things pretty quickly and to react pretty quickly.
Yeah, you don't have to be rocket scientists.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to think. You can't have an 80 in
IQ.
Intelligence.
Yeah.
You can do other things with 80. You can.
Yeah.
But you cannot. If you have someone else's life as well as your own, that you have to consider that. I don't think at an IQ of 80 you're capable of doing that.